So then moving to item 10, the LTP 2021 update. Peter, welcome to the table. And noting the additional document on the hub, which I'm guessing, Peter, is the report that that'll be the substance of what you're speaking to this morning. So if you can maybe just take us through that, assuming it's been read, but if you can just take us through some of the detail, that would be excellent.
Sure. Good morning. Right, beginning with the executive summary, a lot of the LTP is still on track, but there are some things that are behind schedule. There's a complex series of reasons for that around COVID, Annual Plan 2.0 and others. But essentially the key parts that we're not able to put in front of you at this point are the activity budgets and to some extent the savings required. We also have a little bit of complexity around the capital program. We'd like to put in front of you the draft capital program with the savings options, the rates increase options clearly transposed across the top. So you can see what 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 would look like on the capital program. So that's the next step there. We have had a heads up from Audit New Zealand that they're going to be very focused on asset planning information and renewals. And we've also had a little internal heads up that we may need to look at some soft spots there. So that's an issue. And for those reasons, the plan has moved from green to amber. That doesn't mean that this stuff can't be brought back on track. It's just a flag so that you've got an early notice that we've got issues that we're dealing with. It isn't a terminal case. It's simply we're being open with you about where we're at. In terms of the things that are on track, the big stuff largely is the co-development process is in place. The strategic direction work and the central government authorities are well understood. The IS has been well received by both EAG and Council. The financial strategy, of course, took a hit from COVID and the lockdown. But now that we've got a lot of parameters established, that's moving forward. As I said, the operational savings and activity budgets are probably the chief stumbling block at this point. Activity plans are in front of you, but without that engine room of the numbers, I would think it's fair to say that process isn't where it should be. Asset plans have been completed, and it's just a matter of going back and looking at some of those soft spots that audit is going to be probing into, so that when we do talk to them about it, we're in the right space. Capital prioritisation, you've had a number of briefings from Carolyn, and as I said, it's now a matter of transposing the realities of the rates increase options across that program so that you can see just how tough some of those are going to be in terms of what the capital program will look like. Bearing in mind that there's a focus from Audit New Zealand both on the affordability of the program but also the deliverability of the program. That's a nationwide issue, that's not a Christchurch issue. Councils across New Zealand are struggling to deliver their capital programs, which means we're making promises as a sector that we're not living up to. And audit is coming in on that pretty hard. There's a briefing coming up later this month for you on how the stakeholder engagement will occur for the LTP. That's probably a rather distant goal at the moment. We've got to get through the mechanics of the budget and stuff first, but there's an interesting and breakthrough range of options there for us on engagement. The process review of the LTP is somewhat top heavy. There's a lot of oversight, and Audit New Zealand are coming in to formally begin that shortly. And of course the external advisory group has been meeting since March with about 15 or 16 meetings under its belt, and I understand they've briefed you on some of their findings in a preliminary way. So look, they're the strengths of the thing, and there's also some things in there that need some work, but that's the state of play as of today.
Thank you, Peter, for that. We'll move to questions next. Now, Dawn, did you have some comments as well?
Yes.
Yep.
To aid the discussion, and thank you, Peter, for the overview. I think the important thing to be saying to members, we are being very open and transparent on the journey of devising our LTP. We're trying something different. In doing that, we were never going to get it completely right, and we know we've hit some stumbling blocks. I'm not uncomfortable about that because we're aware of them. It doesn't mean that I'm ecstatically happy, and neither will my staff team be, and neither will you, but we are going through a journey to try and do this better. So in light of the areas that Peter has described, let me just touch on some of those for you. So in relation to the budgets, I am expecting the capital work to be completed in terms of the budget numbers by mid-September, so that we'll be in a position when we see the rest of the work done by finance and OPEX as well, which we're expecting by the end of September, that we'll have the budget position in the totality by the end of the month. I think that still puts us ahead of the game than where we were previous to LTPs. On the levels of service, which Peter didn't really touch on, I do think collectively, as governance and as the senior team, we do need to do more work on that. It still feels like some of the process of the past that the Mayor has described to me, and I do think we need to come together to work through really what could that look like, and give further guidance to heads of service, because I do think we want to reduce those numbers and be more focused and recognise managing those expectations. The challenge of bringing the levels of savings to give you choice, we are seeing the difficulty with that. We've seen first 4 activity plans. We are not there. Some saving material in there, but nowhere near enough. And having reflected on that, I've discussed with my colleagues the need for utilisation data and geography data, which I think will help us look at the overall strategic picture, because I think you need to see that to help you make more detailed decisions and guidance as we go through. Because I do think that's going to be increasingly important. And I think that probably covers it, because I think Peter said most of the other stuff. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So just going through the report, the financial strategy, I think there's value in further defining the parameters, and I think that's something that we need to do sooner rather than later. We talk about the parameters have been identified in workshops with councillors. I think we need to further hone in on those and make sure that we're getting a clear set of parameters in place that then are used as guidelines for the other work that's been put together. That obviously influences the size of the capital programme, the amount of operational saving that we're looking for, really provides those guiding principles in which we look at the activity plans and the capital programme. The activity plans, clearly, and you've pointed it out, there's a need for the budget to land so that we can look at those in a financial context as well as a service delivery context. You note, Peter, 4 to 6 weeks in the report in front of us. When are you expecting that we will have budgets in front of us alongside those activity plans?
When this report was written, because of the lead times of the committee, it was 10 days ago. We know a good deal more now than we did then. The figure I heard from Patricia yesterday was around 4 weeks to prepare the budgets. So I would anticipate, and this is subject to the financial staff talking further to it, that the end of the month would be about right. But it is a bit heavily contingent on ELT's deliberations on the savings to be built into those budgets. So there's a bit of chicken and egg there. The financial team has said we can deliver budgets in 4 weeks, but from when are the savings clear?
Yeah, because we need, so again, that's why we need to give early guidance through the parameters, and we expect the parameters that we provide to be the subject of the discussions that occur at ELT. But really, I think we need to be setting a clear expectation that those budgets will be in front of us within that 4 weeks, or at the end of that 4 weeks that you're talking about. Otherwise, you know, this does become an area of greater risk. And we're ahead of this at the moment. We need to make sure we stay ahead of it. There is some value in discussing the activity plans as we are at the moment, but there will be much more value in discussing them with budgets and savings alongside. So can I encourage the landing of those budgets as quickly as possible? And I think 4 weeks is reasonable. If it strayed too far outside of that, we'd be becoming concerned, I think.
So you'd be looking at the beginning of October, wouldn't you?
Beginning of October would be at the very outside, yes. Yeah. I mean, if we said a month from now, that takes us to the first week of October. that'll still be workable. If it was to be any longer than that, then we would be having some problems, which therefore means it cannot be any longer than that. Okay, and then and I'll come to other questions in a minute, Sam. I see you signalling there as well. I'll come to you first. Capital prioritisation obviously is another piece of work that we need to do. It flows on directly from the setting of the parameters. And I agree with the approach that's set out here, but again, we need to make sure we do that sooner rather than later, because the assumptions that we start to make around the capital programme will play directly into operating expenses, activity plans, what we're proposing to do and what we're needing to pay for. So it's important that we do that capital prioritisation work early rather than late. And then on the engagement, I think it's important that we take the opportunity there for a discussion on what any pre-engagement might look like and what value it might have and what the subject areas of that pre-engagement might be. There have been some discussions informally already, and I think that's something that we need to be formalising sooner rather than later, because if there's going to be value in pre-engagement, depending what it is, the earlier we do that, the sooner we can start picking up the information that comes back as a result of it.
Understood.
Yep.
Look, I met with the engagement team last week, and I guess the crux of that discussion was the best information we have on the community is essentially pre-lockdown, and the world is different now. So if we wanted to understand what the community wants from the LTP, using a resident survey that was conducted in February is not actually going to be that timely. So there's a whole raft of thinking that the engagement team has done about how we could do this in a smart way and in an up-to-date way without spending a lot of money.
So again, I think we need that brought back to us sooner rather than later, because if we're going to use the results of any pre-engagement, any feedback that comes about as a result of that pre-engagement to influence the way that we're building the plan in its early stages, the sooner we've got that, the better. And as I say, there may be particular areas of focus that we want that pre-engagement to look at.
Understood.
All right, thank you. Sam.
Well, thank you, Peter. And I guess, some of it's a good report. Some of it is relatively alarming, though, particularly around that separate cover stuff. So the operational savings and activity budgets one, which is highlighted red. Can you just talk me through, because I guess that was the one that jumped out for me, and Dawn's obviously touched on it as well. But when you look back at the letter of expectation we set out for the LTP, it talks about the need for us to have the budgets at the same time as reviewing the activity plans. Can you allude to, I guess, basically why that hasn't happened?
Well, I think there's a series of explanations that the finance people could speak to, perhaps better than I can. But obviously, one of the barriers has been that COVID-19 alert and lockdown, and having run a second annual plan was a formidable barrier. That was over in basically towards the end of June. So I think that we, as I said earlier, we have a chicken and egg cycle here between the budgets and the savings. You can't build the budgets till you know what the savings looks like, and to some extent you don't know what you need to save until you know what the parameters look like for the budgets. So we need to break that cycle, and the work is progressing. As to the mechanics of exactly how the accounts work, I can't speak to that.
So the next one, I guess, because it talks about the budget process involving governance at every stage. Yeah, we've done, and I don't know if it might be a question more for Dawn or for Carol, but we've done 4 activity plans already with basically no figures at all or no savings, except for some real high-level stuff where we haven't got direction. I mean, I expressed concern at the time, but can you just talk me through how we're going to fix that? Because that is quite significant. I mean, there's no point doing an LTP if we don't have draft budgets.
Yeah, I'm happy to say that. So I'm not sure I completely agree with you, Sam, actually, because yes, you need to understand what your budgets are, but you also need to have a view about what are you prepared, what is it you want to continue doing, what is the things you want to concentrate on, what are the things you want to stop. Don't actually require money, they're about the principles of what it is the council should do. So I do think that dialogue is important, and having that also then shapes the budget. No COVID and no annual plan 2, we'd be in a position where we'd have activity plans and we'd have budgets. We don't. I can't unfix that. What are we doing about it? We've got a programme of savings that is probably around 24 million at the moment. we know we need to take that up to as close to 40 million as we can get it in light of the prospective parameters, which we think are about there anyway, but we need to reconfirm. ELT this week, after seeing the first 4 and some of the challenges around that, some budget savings in there, but nowhere near enough. We're saying, okay, we've gone through invest, stop, different, redirect, and we're utilising that information to go back into the budget lines. And just as we did in the annual plan 2, I've got Carolyn leading the capital work, and I spoke to Mary yesterday and said, okay, I want you to do the same thing in relation to the OPIC stuff that we did for annual plan 2, because we're not getting enough from the floor. And that's about the cultural shift as well. I expect us to be in that position by the end of the month.
Okay, so the other one was, I mean, obviously yesterday at that LTP briefing we talked about when the budgets would start getting underway, and Patricia alluded to sort of, was it 4 to 6 weeks from then, which
Yes,
puts us into, what, mid-October?
No, we're looking at the beginning of October.
So it could be delivered in there? Yeah, okay. Well, I wonder, Andrew, if we can just add something into the recommendations to drive that. So I have drafted something up. I just think to be more specific on the organisation.
I think we're agreed that, you know, I've already made some comments around this being a key focus of activity and timing.
Yep.
Dawn has already reflected back that we expect to have that by the first week of October. So as long as what you're suggesting is aligned with that,
I've just flicked it to Samantha now. So
all right, if we can get whatever you've got in front of us. I do see value in continuing the early work on the activity plans because, you know, there've been good discussions, even though they haven't landed the specifics that we might have hoped we would be able to land with a budget alongside. But they do inform some of the budget work as we go. But equally, I do think we need to be looking at the overall table of potential operational savings. We need to go back and look at those savings that we took for 1 year for the annual plan and consider where there's an appetite to make those savings, either take them for a further year or make them more permanent.
And I think, but probably more importantly at the moment, what we're hearing is we need to put a line in the sand as to when we actually get those draft budgets and savings. Yep. So hopefully Sam can just put that up.
Yeah, so absolutely. No, let's do that. And I think there's some really early work. And when I say early, I'm thinking, you know, probably next week around reconfirming those parameters, which are then going to make all of these conversations we're saying we want to happen before the beginning of October a lot more easy to define.
Just while Sam's working on that, could I pose a basic plumbing question for you, Mr. Chair? If we're going to have discussions on the financial strategy parameters, the capital program and engagement, would it be more productive to have those in the meetings we've got in the next 2 or 3 weeks than to continue pursuing the activity plans? Or do you want to do both?
I think we need to be setting the parameters and doing the high-level work as a matter of priority. I think that's hugely important. But what I don't want is to be getting further behind on those higher level discussions on the activity plans because we're waiting for the budget. I think there will, and maybe we identify those activity plans where we feel that there is value in talking about service delivery and opportunities for change and so on, as we have with some of the plans already. Maybe we can look at the activity plans where we think there's more value and more change likely to be found and focus on those. I do agree that having the activity plans and the budget side by side is what we need in order to be able to land a final position, but there'll be some early discussions that we can have in the meantime while we're waiting for the budgets that will still have value.
So Andrew, my one's up there now if that helps people.
All right, request that draft activity budgets, which must include savings required to reduce operational expenditure by 26 million, plus options to reduce it significantly further, are provided to councils in activity plans by the 5th of October to ensure that the requirements of the letter of expectation are met. All proposed savings must be highlighted for council decision making.
So Andrew, if I could just comment on that.
Please do.
Chair. I think whether it's actually in the activity plans is a different issue. For me, I think you need the full list of potential savings as we did for annual plan 2. What does that look like, full list look like?
But we want draft activity budgets as well though.
Yes.
That's what I mean, we can put it to the floor, but we just need a line in the sand to actually move forward, or else we're going to go around in circles.
So if we were to take out the words in activity plans, that would allow us to provide it by whatever means. And if that means it can be provided in a way that's easier for us to consider and easier, the objective here is finding opportunities for savings. That may be in activity plans or it may be by some other means.
Yeah, I think it's what I don't want is to get to the 5th of October and then we go, oh no, we need a couple more weeks to pull it into a form that we can read. Yeah, so by the 5th of October we need draft activity plans or budget, basically revised budgets and the savings as well, and hopefully that captures it.
Yeah, because depending on what you do in the savings profile, because you would look at that, rather than doing what you've always done, which is you've looked at, well you haven't because you haven't been here, members have looked at individual activity plans and individual budgets, and then you've looked at it at that and said, oh, we'll have a bit more of that, a bit less of that, whatever it might be. We need to look at the budget in total and the savings plan in total. So you can go, no, we want more of that. Yes, we want significantly less of that. That will then impact on what the activity budgets
but
look like.
We do also need ELT to have come up with ingrained savings before they get to us.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that kind of captures that as well.
It does.
Yeah, and the work that I want us to be doing on parameters next week will set those goalposts as well.
Yeah.
All right, so if we were to remove the words in activity plan, Sam, would you be comfortable with that?
Fine.
Yeah. I think, it's by whatever means. It may be in the activity plans, it may be by some other mechanism.
And finish by the 5th.
Yeah. All right. That's all good. So if we take you as the mover of this resolution when we get there with that additional clause in, that's fine. All right, so now coming to, so was there anything else from you, Sam? All right, so I've now got a number of people indicating questions. I've got Aaron, Melanie, Sarah, Yanni, Jake, and Anne. Right, Aaron.
Yeah, so Peter, just a question around with this setting of budgets, and at the moment, from the briefings we've had so far, the direction doesn't seem to be that clear. So what are you working to if you're doing the budgets first, or do you need more direction before they start coming up?
Well, the budgets that would be normally built for an activity support the levels of service. They're what you need to make those levels of service happen.
Yeah, but so are you feeling like from the ones we've had so far you're getting a clear steer of which direction they should be going? Because I'm there and don't feel it. But
I can only offer a personal opinion. I thought the libraries plan was well presented and it gave options on savings going forward.
Yes,
I'm
I
not sure that the
100%
others
agree.
were the same.
Right. So they need to be clearer on options, but are you feeling this table's been clear on direction when they're presented?
I'm not sure that managers have walked away with a clear picture of what the saving is or isn't.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Melanie.
Dawn, you talked about the operational budgets or plans or whatever for the activity plans, and you talked about geography and other things. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So my thinking is, again, and I'll highlight two areas that immediately sprung to mind in the debates we've had on the 4 activity plans so far. One on libraries, where we were discussing libraries, and then we went and you discussed voluntary libraries, which happened to be in another activity plan that has not come forward. They are interrelated, yet they're being looked at separately. We discussed the parks work, the parks activity plan, and then we were discussing the swales, which land drainage put in. And again, that's in a separate activity plan at a different time in the schedule. So what it's doing is it's highlighting actually the interrelationship on certain things, which is why I stress to you, I think we need to look at the whole programme and talk through what that looks like, which will impact then on the activity plans. And the other side of that equation, Melanie, is the levels of service. We collectively have not really discussed what should or could that look like from a governance perspective, and I think we really do need to do that.
Yeah, and that leads me just to my other point, really, is that it seems to me we're talking about often cutting budget lines, but we aren't talking about, like you're saying, levels of service and reducing the amount within each budget line. It never really came up. We're not cutting the fat, we're just cutting potentially services, and I'm not happy with that at all.
So you've got to think, because savings is your shorthand. In the end, we know that the council's challenge is a range on its financial budget. That needs to be a perspective of where do you want to continue to spend the resource? Where could we drive more income? Because income will contribute to the bottom line. What do we think we should change because we're doing it and it's really long-winded, inefficient and a bit bonkers, if I can say that, in council? And fourthly, and members have to accept when you're talking about the numbers we are talking about, it will require us to change some things that we're doing and reduce some things and potentially stop things on those sorts of numbers. So that relates then to the levels of service. And if we have services, for example, that are operating at 100% when the level of service we've set currently is 85, we should be questioning ourselves, should we be operating at that level? Do we need to operate at that level? Which would bring savings. So it's a whole smorgasbord of choice. It's not just cut the budget and therefore cut services. But some of those things would have to be that on those levels. And I wouldn't want members to believe that that isn't the case.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Just a quick point on resolution 2 there, the additional one. Just that all proposed savings must be highlighted for council decision making. I'm not quite sure the stage of the process. The actual decision making is next year in the LTP. So whether it's at this stage for guidance, that kind of thing. It's just that, yeah.
So just all proposed savings must be highlighted. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
If we can make that change.
Yeah. I mean, the decision making is not for a long time. Yeah.
So all proposed savings must be highlighted. If you just remove the words for council decision making.
Yeah.
There will, ultimately there will be a council decision, but it'll be in June 2021.
Yeah.
Or, well, it'll be when we go out with the draft, first of all, and then it'll be in June 2021 as a final decision.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yanni.
The thing I'm still struggling with this process is the lack of visibility on like the individual strategies. So if I take the arts strategy, there's actually a really awesome implementation plan that staff have sent through to me, which is actually really good. It's plain English, it's clear kind of objectives, milestones, but it doesn't have any sort of budget attached to each action, although it's got timing. So I've just looked at the water supply one, where we've got a water strategy, a water implementation plan being developed, and yet we're being asked today to consider the water supply activity management plan without any understanding of the implementation plan. So I'm trying to kind of understand at a high level how these plans are reflective of the strategies that we've agreed with our communities that we will do, and then what happens in terms of the choice between what we've agreed with the community versus the issue like saving reductions, and how we get visibility of that as we go through.
Okay, there's two parts to that answer. One is the same answer I gave last month, which is that each activity may or may not have a strategy. The strategy may or may not have an implementation plan. It may or may not have a budget for that. So each one is a case-by-case basis. They're all different. And it's the head of's job to make sure that their activity plan explains how their activity relates to the strategy, if in fact there is one, and it has a plan, and it has a budget. The other thing is, though, and this is a tough one to broach, is that I'm echoing Dawn's sentiment about activity plans being kind of silos and that you need to see the whole. Council approves strategies in the same way. Over the term of its life, it will approve a number of strategies, and there will be other strategies that were approved by previous councils. If you add them all up, you may not be able to afford them. And the LTP is the mechanism by which you decide what stands or falls from all of those decisions that have stacked up over months or perhaps years around strategies. In reality, the decision of what gets implemented is the LTP and the annual plan, rather than the adoption of a strategy as one component coming off a conveyor belt.
So I guess the question really is, should the implementation plans be coming along with the activity management plans? So when we see what we've agreed with the community through a consultation and engagement process, what we can see is what the budget implications are if we want to agree to what's been agreed, or we can say, actually, this is no longer what we're going to do. But because I just can't see otherwise how we have transparency over that. Like, it's certainly not, from my reading of the documents we've got, it's really not clear.
Okay, look, if there is a strategy behind an activity plan, when the manager explains the outcomes they're trying to achieve, they should be talking to that strategy and saying, under strategy X, these are the outcomes we're trying to deliver these are the outputs that will make them happen, this is the budget that's required as it relates to the strategy. But if they're not doing that, then that needs to be raised, or it may be that the priorities have changed since then.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say, and it's a difficult one, is that the approval of a strategy, say 2 years ago, does not lock the current LTP into doing exactly that in the face of changed financial position, changed priorities, new strategic direction.
Yeah, I get all that.
Moment.
I get all that. But what we're often told when we adopt a strategy without any budget is A, it will be done under existing budgets, or B, it'll be an implementation plan that will be developed that will inform the LTP or the annual plan.
And I think you have every right to expect that when you see the activity plan.
Okay. Well, I'll be raising the water supply implementation plan again today for about the 5th time in the last 2 weeks. You know.
That opportunity will come when we do the water activity
in
plans.
terms of the time frame, surely we should align, if we're developing an implementation plan, we should align the activity management plan report back to council when that implementation plan is ready.
So we've
Otherwise,
already
we're just going
talked
in
about the
circles.
alignment of the activity plans, the draft activity plans, with the strategic directions, with the community outcomes. And I guess what Yanni is now raising, and I would have expected it would have been the case already, that those activity plans should also be aligned with any strategies and implementation plans or action plans of those strategies. And that, as you quite rightly say, Peter, is the moment when we have the opportunity to decide the priority that we give and any other matters relating to the implementation of those strategies. So it's another area of alignment that we absolutely expect to see.
Does that feel like we get lost in the activity management plans and levels of service without looking at the strategic outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And I think the EAG kind of reflected that.
Yeah.
So just the final question from me was around the community board one, where we've got the community board plans. It's not the thing was supposed to be up on the 2nd, and it's not there. But I can understand that it's coming on the 15th of September. It's 3 hours. Are we anticipating the community board chairs to attend that?
Look,
and
I need to talk to John Philsell, but I believe that's the case.
Right.
It's meant to be a joined up process, so it's not a standalone.
Yeah.
So I believe the board chairs will be there to talk to the plans.
So having just come from a community board planning session yesterday, apologies for not being at YMAC, just in terms of being constructive on the day when the community boards come and talk to us, are we clear about what information we want them to bring in terms of budget implications?
Look, I think maybe I need John to come back to you with the detail on that because he's organising that event.
I think we need to pick it up as part of the LTP planning as well. There have been very good iterations of those type of meetings in the past, and there have been not so good iterations of those type of meetings in the past. We need to make sure we get this right. We need to get ahead of it in the LTP planning so that we know exactly what is intended and that the boards are ready for what's intended and prepared for it.
The fault there lies with me. John has developed a program of work for that event and an itinerary schedule. Or an agenda, I'm sorry, I just can't recall what he's put in it.
Can we pick it up offline?
Sure.
Because we need it to be useful and effective.
And it would be useful if you could give some feedback. If you say some things have worked in the past and others have not, it would be very useful to understand what hasn't and why.
Yeah.
So we know not to make that same mistake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I just circle briefly back to Councillor Johansson's point about strategies, strategic directions, outcomes? It's been my observation that when all councils go through these plans, that the front piece, which is what is this activity going to do about our to give effect to our strategic directions, community outcomes, and our strategies, is that collectively councils tend to go past that pages very quickly to get to the budgets and levels of service, and so the time is not spent on understanding that front end, that strategic front end of the activity in the race to get to budgets, projects, levels of service. I do recall previous councils where those discussions on $100 million activities simply took less than 10 seconds before we went straight to budgets and into the weeds. But that front end, the managers do spend a lot of time talking about how they are going to address our strategic priorities, community outcomes, etc. And if there's a fault in what they're doing there or thinking there, the discussion needs to be had. But it's customary for all councils to move through quite quickly to get to the concrete mechanics.
So we've deliberately this time taken a very standardised approach to the way that those activity plans are presented. And I think coming out of Yanni's highlighting of this issue in this meeting, that standardised approach needs to be not just regard to strategic directions, community outcomes, but also to strategies and associated implementation plans or action plans.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, Andrew, we've just had a chat with Carol, who's obviously leaving tomorrow, and Di, who's taking over.
Yes.
And they've just come up with some more wording, which they're going to bring up in a minute, and it just, sorry to drag it out, it just makes it a lot more
Tightens
clear.
it.
Yeah. So it's basically, there'll be draft operational budgets. Before then, we'll have the savings identified and reported to us. And then following that, it requests that draft activity budgets are prepared ASAP.
All right.
So it's just putting it in a line in the sand, and it notes Sarah's point about we can't make decisions yet, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So
Yeah,
some work's
sorry about
going on
that.
that. I
It
was going
just
to
makes
check in
more
with
sense.
Dawn to make sure that what we'd got was capable of being implemented and worked
Yeah,
anyway.
I think this will be a lot more
So
structured,
you've obviously
so.
preempted that, and that's good. So let me finish with questions,
Yep, cool.
and then we'll come back to that matter so that before we start debating anything, we've got a clear set of resolutions in front of us that you'll be the mover of, so you need to be comfortable with the wording of. Yep, all right, that's fine. So coming back to questions, Jake, did you have something?
Oh no, I was just happy to
yeah.
second.
All right, so when we get there, we'll note that as well. Just noting that there may be a change to the wording, so I'll come back and check in with you at that point. All right, that's fine. And Anne, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Just, you used the word co-current development, and I'm just wondering where the community fits into that. I see on our events schedule that we don't get to hear from Di until the 3rd of November, and there's a question mark there. Is there any value in meeting with the comms team earlier to just talk about some of the ideas that you've alluded to in terms of engaging the community in this process of developing an LTP in a way that is sort of just a dipping in? For example, the libraries and some of the things we had discussion on the other day. Is there an opportunity to go to the community in a very sort of brief, quick way to get a response? You know, would you be happy with this or this? And getting a sense from community on where we're heading.
Yes, and that's why I posed the question about whether the activity plan scheduled for this month should go ahead, given the amendment that's being put up, or if you wanted to use those time slots, because I need to get straight into the plumbing here. Council time slots, Finance Committee time slots are hard to get. Briefings are hard to get. Your diaries are basically at capacity. So it does present a dilemma that if you wanted to talk to the engagement team, talk about the capital program earlier, talk about the parameters, that's either extra to what you've got scheduled this month, or you could do instead of. Now, I'm hearing that you don't want to stop with the activity plans, but that means finding more time. The engagement team is ready to talk to you. They've got a good program of work, quite targeted. They know how they could do it. And I think there's even a degree of nervousness that we'd like to get some of this done just in case that, for example, there's another lockdown and you can't do it. So there's various reasons why they would like to talk to you early. And I'm hearing that you'd like to talk to them. It's just basic plumbing about how do we make that possible.
So coming back to my earlier comments, I think that early conversation with the engagement team is essential. I'm aware of conversations that are going on that we want to daylight around early engagement, possible engagements around particular activities. The engagement team have obviously already done some work, as you say, which is ready to be put in front of us. I'm really keen to see how that aligns with some of the other good ideas that have been raised already. And if we're going to do pre-engagement, in many ways, the earlier we do that, the earlier we can take the benefit of it and build it into the way that we're planning the LTP, developing the LTP. So I do think that there are some areas where we need to absolutely lift these things up and do them earlier. The engagement would be one. The prioritisation of the capital programme would be another. The budget table and looking at those savings that we took for 1 year in the annual plan that we might have an appetite to take for a further year or even longer in the LTP. That's all work that we can be getting on with, and we want to prioritise above some of the other work. If that means re-timetabling, then that's what we need to do. But I'm certainly not suggesting that we stop all work on the activity plans in the meantime. Okay. I think there's value, but also having a look at which of the activity plans are the ones we can most valuably spend time on before we've got the budgets, realising that we're not going to give any final guidance or any clear direction on a lot of those until we can see them with the budgets alongside. But we've got to keep this moving, otherwise we're going to put ourselves under a lot of pressure at the other end of the timescale. And also noting your comments around COVID levels, we need to get ahead of this in case we end up in and let's hope we don't, but we end up in a more restrictive level than we have been in, that then impacts on our ability to do the work.
Okay.
So on the engagement, there's a very simple solution. We just switch one for another and just bring it forward.
Yep.
And Peter and I can sort that out. I want to be in a position whereby we can take the Tuesdays that you have on Community Week and utilise those days properly and fully, not just an hour here, an hour there, but actually book full days, and we do the LTP, and we do that right until Christmas.
And that's learning from the way we did the annual plan take 2. Which, we did a lot of work in a very short time. That was the way we went about that. I think that's what we need to be replicating here. Clearly, there are some conversations to take offline as a result of the commentary in this meeting, but there's a sentiment that there's an order of things that needs to occur so that we can get to the best result, which is the level of savings that we're looking for and the ability to take a good hard look at the capital programme. Anne, did you have something further?
Another question, if I may. We've talked a lot about engaging volunteering and in different areas. We talked about it in the libraries and we talked about it in parks as well. Is there an opportunity to lift that up as breaking down the silos as an overall strategy? And how would we do that through funding, long-term plan type stuff? I'd be interested to know if that's a possibility.
I'm sure it's a possibility, but I don't have a comprehensive answer for you straight away. I think that would be something to discuss with the operational heads, parks and so forth, about what shape that would take and how we'd roll it out. So I don't want to just answer off the hip.
But please don't see that as a panacea for what will be some difficult decisions.
I get that.
Yeah, that's certainly something we can have top of mind as we look at the activity plans for those areas where there are opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen some of that already. All right, thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? All right, that's been a good discussion.
Very good.
And it's resulted in some actions that we'll pick up outside of this meeting, but that we'll see make some change in programming and content from next week onwards, I would say. That's good. Now, Sam, where have we got to with your resolution?
Yeah, I think we're pretty good. So it just spells out exactly what needs to happen, and then so basically, they're gonna come up with the savings, then incorporate, after, and bring it to council, run it through the operational budgets, and then after that they'll go away and work through the draft activity management plans.
That's fine.
Which is what we wanted, but it just hopefully puts a timeline on it.
Yeah, that's okay.
So you're comfortable with resolutions 1 to 4?
Yep.
Yeah, and Dawn, that's
Yes,
workable
I'm
from
fine.
your team's point of view?
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. So Sam, you're moving this. Jake, you're happy to second? Fantastic. So that puts it on the table. Is there any discussion? I think a lot of what needs to be said has been teased out by way of questions and answers and comments as we've had a reasonably free-flowing discussion, but I think that's been useful. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Peter, thank you very much indeed for answers to questions and for the report. And thanks, in fact, to everybody who's working on all of the different strands of work that are feeding into the long-term plan. It's a huge piece of work, and it needs to be, because it's a big job that we've got in front of us. So thank you to you and to the team as well. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, everyone.